Hello and welcome to the Dungeon. I'm your host Rob, and on this channel we discuss all things Dungeons and Dragons related and occasionally other role-playing games as well. But today we're going to be talking about Dragon Heist, the adventure for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. I have to say that so far, out of all the published stuff that Wizards of the Coast has released for 5e, it's one of my favorite adventures. It had a lot of role-playing opportunities. It had a lot of investigation type stuff, which I really liked. It wasn't as combat focused as some of the others. But there was also a lot of frustration with it in different parts as well. And so I'll be getting into that stuff as well. Now, I need to point out that I didn't actually run this game. I was actually a player in this game. The game was run by my friend Jaden. And so I'll be talking about it more from the player point of view than from the Dungeon Master point of view. Obviously, I do have the book, so I've done a lot of reading about it afterwards. And so I'm at least familiar with some of the DM stuff as well. Obviously, there's going to be spoilers. That shouldn't need to be said, but I'll mention it anyways. So if you want to be playing in Dragon Heist at some point, you probably shouldn't be watching the video. At least, I'm sure your Dungeon Master would appreciate it if you don't. So let's just get into it. I'll talk about the different chapters and whatnot. A lot of the book is actually just an overview of Waterdeep and talking about the city and different NPCs in the city and different, the districts and whatnot. And it's funny because I've seen a few people, complain online that oh, this is the Waterdeep I remember from 2nd edition. And I'm always surprised when people say this kind of stuff, because to me, nothing in here is, the way it has to be. Like, if you like 2nd edition Waterdeep better, then run it the way you remember it. Take what you like, throw out the stuff you don't like. But yeah, to me, that's just it's kind of given. I never really take any of the stuff that they give us and then say, oh, well, it has to absolutely be this way. I'm always taking stuff and leaving other stuff out. But whatever. In my opinion, though, it's your game world, so just run it the way you want it. And anything that, Wizards or someone else publishes, that's just suggestions and ideas, at least in my opinion anyway. So, Chapter 1 started with the players all meeting with Volo, who wrote Volo's Guide to Monsters, and he hires the party to find and rescue a friend of his. But he doesn't actually have any money because he's still waiting on the royalties from Volo's Guide to Monsters, which I thought was kind of funny. So, we do this investigation, we find out where his friend has been taken, and our party goes into the sewers underneath Waterdeep, and we have our first big fight. And we all die. We literally had a TPK in our first big fight. So, I was actually playing a warlock at the time, and Mike was playing a fighter, and we all just sucked on our initiative rolls, except for Mike. So the fighter goes charging in right off the bat, and there's an intellect devourer in the room, and of course the intellect devourer attacks Mike. Mike, who doesn't have a lot of intelligence anyways because he's a fighter, fails his saving throw. The intellect devourer basically one-shots him, and then all the rest of the villains get to go because we all sucked on our initiative rolls. The enemy wizard moves up close, hits everybody with a Burning Hand spell. Every single player character failed their saving throw, and then he rolled like a 15 or 16 or something on his 3d6 for the damage, and just one-shotted the entire party. So we later kind of, started talking about it, and Troy pointed out that he technically wasn't dead, he was only unconscious. So he's like, well, I'm going to make a death saving throw. And then he, of course, rolled a natural 20. And we still wanted to go on with the adventure, so this was kind of the end of the first night. And I was like, well, Volo hired multiple groups, and some of the guys wanted to, play new characters, such as myself, and some of the guys still wanted to play their original characters because they didn't really have a chance to do anything. So we just kind of figured, well, Troy's guy technically lived, whoever else wants to play their other character, we can, and then we'll just continue with the new characters, and we'll just pretend that half of their party died and then half the other party died. So the new party will be the amalgamation of the new characters that me and Mike decided to make, the old characters that Troy and Brenda decided to keep, and then Trish joined the game for the second night, so we had another character as well, and we just kind of kept on going. So it was pretty funny though, our first big fight, and everybody dies. So anyways, chapter 2, after rescuing Floon Blagmar, Volo's buddy, we get rewarded with this like old haunted tavern called Trollskull Manor. Now, we came up with half a dozen names that were all much better than Trollskull Manor, but in the end, we just kept calling it that anyways, or at least the Dungeon Master did. Some of the other names we had, which were much better, of course, she just tried to ignore. So we had a bunch of missions to try to like make the poltergeist that was haunting the place happy, which we did, and then he ended up becoming our bartender, actually. So it was kind of like Poltergeist meets Cocktail, I guess. And he'd pour drinks for people, and it became kind of this attraction where, you know, this invisible poltergeist would like pull out drinks from the bar and pour them for people and whatnot, or pull up a stool for somebody. So that was kind of fun. And we had a ton of fun role-playing a lot of stuff with customers and whatnot. We also had a bunch of different groups in the city that hired players or requested players to do different missions, such as the Emerald Enclave, the Order of the Gauntlet, the Force Grey, and all those types of groups. So we went and did a bunch of missions for them as well and gained some reputation and status with them. We also had competitors who was kind of across the street from us who became kind of a problem. They started spreading rumors about our place being infested by rats. So the druid decided to get back at them by turning into like burrowing animals and started digging under the foundation of his place. And we had, you know, quite a back and forth there. So then in chapter 3, though, his place was actually destroyed when a fireball went off in the alley. And I think that was supposed to happen anyways, but we all felt that it was, you know, augmented by the druid's activities of constantly burrowing underneath their foundation in order to cause the place to collapse. This led to a big investigation, and we had to do a bunch of problem solving and detective work, which I kind of liked. It was a lot of fun. And, you know, one thing led to another. We eventually discovered that there was this vault full of 500,000 gold pieces called gold dragons, which of course is where Dragon Heist comes from. And there was a stone that you could use to find the vault. And there were keys that you needed to open the vault, whatnot. So, of course, motivated by greed, our party decided to start working towards that. So my character was actually a noble, and that ended up being kind of relevant later, I guess, because I was actually, you know, was from Waterdeep and my family was long established. We are basically bankrupt, though. Our house is basically just a fancy title and a, you know, and a flag at this point, and an old decrepit manor with a few servants left, because we basically have no money. So this is why I was willing to lower myself into becoming a member of the mercantile class and run a seedy establishment with the peasants. But, you know, you do what you have to do because you're trying to buy plate mail. So chapter 4 ended up having us essentially find where the stone was, and there was a bunch of cultists of Asmodeus, and this led to the most frustrating part of the entire adventure. So we had this big fight at the mill, and one of the cultists ends up throwing the stone out the window to this devil that they've summoned up. And the devil starts flying onto a stone. And half the party is inside the building, and half the party's now trying to like run after these guys and chase them across the city. And of course they're flying and we're running across rooftops. Fortunately, the Blade Singer had his hawk familiar, and if it wasn't for that thing, we never would have been able to find a stone, I swear. So the party gets split at this point because the barbarian decides to stay behind and, you know, kill people, as barbarians want to do. And half the party's chasing across the roofs after the stone. And this is where things felt like that real railroady. Because before they were actually able to get out of range, the ranger decides to try shooting the devil with the stone. And go figure, she rolls a natural 20 and one-shots this guy with her arrow. And he throws the stone before he dies to one of the other devils, who continues to fly away with it. And then the wizard managed to hit that thing with Earthblind, and despite having magic resistance, it failed its saving throw, but it also managed to throw the stone to the third devil that was there, and it got away with the stone. So now we're trying to chase this thing across the city. It hands a stone to a bunch of cultists later with a cart, and now we're trying to chase down them. The druid casts Entangle on the cart, and manages to like freeze the cart up, but the guy with the stone, of course, makes his saving throw. So he jumps off and runs into the crowd, and there's like a festival parade thing going on. So the ranger decides to literally just shoot arrows into the crowd of people to try to kill this guy, and rolls another natural 20 and one-shots this guy. And unfortunately, though, he'd already had the stone lifted off him by a bunch of street urchins. And the players all kind of saw this happen because the familiars saw this happen, but the player characters didn't know, except for the wizard, who, of course, isn't with the rest of the party because he's with the barbarian and they're trying to catch up. So we're hunting this guy through the crowd, even though we know he's the wrong guy. And this might have motivated the ranger to literally just shoot into a crowd of people and kill the guy, but whatever. So we end up getting to his body, find out, of course, that he doesn't have the stone. By now, the rest of the party's managed to catch up, and they're essentially out of spell slots, and me and the ranger are exhausted from trying to push ourselves so hard to catch up to these devils. And now we find out that the street urchins have taken the things into the sewers. So we go into the sewers, and because our adventure is taking place during the summer, because there's actually 4 different seasons, and which season you have depends on which, or will determine which villain you have. But we're in the middle of summer, the sewers are super hot, because it's the middle of a heat wave, and everybody in the party is poisoned. So half the party's exhausted, we're out of spell slots, and now we all have the poisoned condition. We find the urchins, one of them drops a stone, we go to pick the stone up, and now it's suddenly gone. And I'm just like, I'm like ready to start, you know, firing into our dungeon master at this point, or at least, you know, with dice. But turns out that the stone's been grabbed by a mimic, so now we have to fight the mimic. And what proceeds is just the worst fight ever, because everybody's poisoned, so we all have disadvantage on our attacks. Only the barbarian with Rex's attack is able to attack normally, and him and the wizard using Toll the Dying, because the mimic at least failed a few of its saving throws, basically managed to finally kill this thing, while the rest of us just flail about hopelessly with our weapons, or fire arrows into the walls of the sewer and destroy half of our arrows. But we finally managed to kill this mimic and get the stone. And like, this chase was literally half the game. So it was kind of getting frustrating at this point. And it felt like no matter what we did, no matter what spells we did, no matter if we killed these things or not, things were always just going to lead to us fighting this mimic in the sewers. And I always hate that feeling as a player. You never want to feel that your choices don't matter or that nothing you do really counts. But whatever. We managed to get the stone. So then we go to leave, and of course we get arrested because there's all these, you know, City Watch and Pegasus Guard and everything else there because we were brandishing weapons in public. We also, the barbarian charged through like an apple cart and, you know, destroyed the thing. So then we got hauled into court. And my paladin at least had good charisma. I was also proficient with persuasion. And we wanted to know if the druid could cast guidance on me while I was, you know, pleading our case. And the DM decided, sure, why not? I think he was feeling generous because he knew that we were all frustrated after the chase scene, so he probably let us get away with one there. And for anybody who's ever said that you don't need a face or that a party face is essentially useless, I give you this game session. Now, part of it was probably that I could not seem to roll less than like a 15 or a 16 on my die 20, and then I also had guidance all the time. So everything that we get charged with, I go to plead our case. So I state, you know, like I start talking about the devils. Unfortunately, there were eyewitnesses who actually seen the devils and had seen us fighting them. So they knew about that. We were able to expose that these guys were actually cultists as well. And because I was a noble, at least I had like that going in my favor as well. I think the DM gave me a +1 or a +2 to my rolls for that. And I kid you not, like every single thing. Okay, you get charged with this, and so I start pleading our case, and you know, make a good case. And he's like, okay, make a persuasion roll. It's like 24, including all my bonuses. Oh, okay, well, you guys are charged with this. 27, including all my bonuses. Oh, you're charged with this. 26 with all my bonuses, and just one thing after another. I basically just, you know, pleaded my case. He's like, okay, make a roll. Ace the roll. Next one, okay, you guys are also charged with this. Plead my case, make the roll. So it was a ton of role playing, and because we were highly successful in this, it was actually pretty fun. Eventually, we basically just get them to drop all the charges and essentially just call us heroes for saving the city from this infernal cult that was, who knows what they were going to do. We didn't mention the stone because we didn't want anybody else going after the gold, of course. But we managed to get the stone back. We get all the charges dropped. We're free and clear to go. We use the stone to find the vault, which is below this building that some other person has bought. And at this point, we're like, so now we have to deal with this person. And, my guy's lawful neutral, but I am still a paladin. I'm all about the law, not necessarily about the good. But, I don't want to just start like murdering people in order to get the gold. I want to get the gold without that. So eventually, the woman who owns the tower challenges the barbarian to a drinking contest, which, by the way, is a terrible idea. Never challenge any barbarian, let alone a dwarven barbarian, to a drinking contest. He drinks her under the table, and she's passed out for like 16 hours. So while this is happening, we go into the vault. We've got the keys by now. We managed to open the door. We go in. We find there's this gold dragon there, charged with defending the vault. So he tells us that he has to protect the gold, and he's here to protect Waterdeep and everything. And we'd already determined, we'd met a Dragonborn bookseller who sold all the different stat books, right? Like the, Tome of Influence and the Manual of Agility and all that kind of stuff. And we decided that the books were 100,000 each. There's 5 of us, so that's 100,000 each. We're each going to buy ourselves a stat book. And just the way things worked out, the Ranger wants the Dex book, the Barbarian wants the Strength book, the Druid wants the Wisdom book, the Blade Singer wants the Intelligence book, and I took the Charisma book. So everything worked out perfectly fine for us. So I managed to convince the dragon that, well, if you actually just like relocate to this guy's shop, then A, he probably won't mind, and B, the gold isn't really leaving Waterdeep, and you can still defend Waterdeep and the gold from this guy's shop. And, maybe he'll enjoy the company. And so the Dungeon Master, after I plead my case here for a while, he's like, okay, make a roll. And I get like a 28 again. I rolled a 19 and then a 4 on the guidance dice, and then with my +3 charisma bonus and +2 from persuasion proficiency, we end up convincing the dragon to like relocate and take the gold. We also convinced the Dragonborn bookseller to throw in a Tensus floating disc for the wizard, so he's like scribes that into his spell book while we're loading all this gold up. And we load it into the disc, float the disc up. We bought ourselves a cart, and then we covered the cart. We had like a tarp, but we also bought a bunch of like pots and pans and jugs so we could look like we were just, pottery merchants. And then during the middle of the night, while the tower owner is still asleep, we load up all the gold and take it to the bookseller, just like trip after trip. The druid turns into like a plow horse and pulls the cart for us. And we essentially just took all the gold and bought ourselves the books. And I don't know if it was supposed to be that easy, or if the Dungeon Master, like I said, was just feeling like there was going to be a player revolt at this point if we had to do, more jumping through hoops. Because this was the same night as the chase, and at this point the game session had been going pretty late. It was like 12:30 or 1 in the morning, somewhere around there at this point when we finally finished everything up. So it was late, and people had been pretty cranky earlier, but we ended up getting the money, bought ourselves the gold, or bought ourselves the books. I managed to negotiate us a deal with the merchant as well and got like 15% off, so I was still able to buy my plate mail, of course, and everything ended pretty well. So that was kind of the scenario. And then since then, because of course I didn't want to spoil anything for myself, I picked up the book and I kind of looked through stuff to get, kind of more of the story ideas so I could do this video and talk about it. So there's 4 different villains you can have, like I said before, and each one depends on the season of the year. There's Xanatar, there's the Castellanters, who we actually had, there's Jarlaxle, and there's Manshun. Now, if I have any complaints about the book, it would be that the villains don't necessarily have to factor in a big way. Like, we literally heard of our villains at one point. We never met them. I guess the cultists were working for them, so we did meet some of their underlings, but we never actually met the main villains, which is probably good because there was a couple of them, and they're all like challenge rating 12 and 13. So we were level 4 at the time, and had we been forced to fight them, we would have gotten destroyed. And then Jarlaxle, of course, is even more powerful than these guys. He's like a CR 16 or 15, somewhere around there. And, Xanatar and Manchun, like, Jalaxle has 5 items attuned to him. Xanatar has, like, 3 magic rings that he's wearing on his eye stalks and whatnot. Yeah, so the villains are pretty crazy. And if your party has to fight them, they will probably just die up. And so that would be one of my big warnings, actually, is that if your party is very combat focused, there's a lot of investigation in this story. There's a lot of, detective work type stuff. There's a lot of role play. And it is pretty light on combat. And the combat that there is could be very, very deadly. So if that's the kind of thing your party usually enjoys, like a lot of dungeon run type stuff, then this might not be the adventure for them. And if your party doesn't know who some of these NPCs are, like maybe you have some newer players, or maybe they're just not into the Forgotten Realms at all, then, they might think that fighting Jalaxle sounds like a great idea. In which case, you'll have to roll up a new party afterwards. Yeah. So, as far as that stuff goes, that would definitely be something I would be concerned about if I was to run this game. You definitely want to know your group. As far as other things go, I think the fact that you can complete the game without ever meeting the villains is kind of neat, but it's also kind of a weakness of the game in a lot of ways. Now, apparently it's not that way for all of them. When I was reading through the book after, Jalaxle will actually take a large interest in the party and will meet them in disguise, because he wants to try to use the party as a bunch of patsies, essentially, and sort of, get the money for himself and then, blame the party. So there is a lot of opportunity to meet him and to roleplay with him. Some of the other ones, like Manchun, is really heavy on the investigation detective work, it appears. So if your party is really, skilled at that kind of stuff or really enjoys that kind of thing, then he would probably be a really good villain. And then the other two are more of a balance between investigation and roleplay and combat, which is a pretty nice middle ground, to be honest. So overall, I thought the villains were really interesting, but they're also way beyond the party's league. And if the party, is kind of hoping to have their big climatic fight at the end and kill the bad guy, they're going to be sorely disappointed, almost guaranteed. Other things is that a lot of the stuff that Wizards of the Coast has released so far for 5th edition, you could really easily set it somewhere else. In fact, they even have guidelines on, how to set this in the world of Greyhawk or the world of Krynn or whatever, your own homebrew setting, whatever. But this one is very, very tied to Waterdeep. And it's not that you couldn't set it somewhere else. You could just make up, just rename all the villains and rename some of the different groups or whatever. But it is definitely tied to the Forgotten Realms in a big way. And I don't know that it would really have the same feel. Part of the attraction of this adventure is that you get to meet people like Volo, and you could meet Jalaxle and Xanatar and stuff like that. You're meeting the people that the books are named after, and you're in Waterdeep. That is a lot of the appeal of this adventure. And if you try to move it somewhere else, not only is it going to be a lot of work, but I think it kind of loses that sort of appeal suddenly, because now it's just some generic city suddenly. It's no longer Waterdeep. I did think that it was a really strong adventure overall. So to kind of conclude and to wrap up my thoughts, as far as the role-playing perspective, I thought that it was one of the strongest ones that Wizards has released so far for 5th edition. As far as roleplay, it was an excellent adventure. You have the tavern and a lot of interesting stuff there. You have a lot of investigation and detective work, which also can lead to some good roleplay. And I liked a lot of the mystery type stuff. The only thing I really disliked, I guess I would say, is that the whole chase scene was not only extremely long, but it also just felt like we really didn't have control over what was happening, and none of our choices were going to matter, because no matter what, we were going to end up in the sewers fighting the Mimic to get the stone. And like I said before, I really hate that feeling as a player. You like to feel that your choices matter, that that your spells are important, because otherwise you wouldn't have chosen them. You could have just chosen Magic Missile, Chromatic Orb, and Burning Hands, Scorching Ray. Just take all combat spells, because if that's the only thing that's going to matter, then that might as well be what you want to do. But personally, I don't really like playing that way. I like a lot of detective work and investigation stuff. And so, in general, I just don't feel like I'm being railroaded in a certain direction. And I definitely had that feeling in Chapter 4. And maybe it was just our table. That might not be for everybody else. It might have just been because ours took place in the summer. Maybe if we'd had a different villain, maybe that wouldn't have been the issue. I don't really know. But it definitely was the low part of the adventure, I would say there. The combat was pretty deadly, as I mentioned earlier. And could have been worse, I think, if we tried to fight any of the main villains or main villain groups. It could be very deadly, which I don't really necessarily mind. I kind of like the idea that the players can finish the adventure without ever fighting the main villain. To me, that kind of appeals to me. But like I said before, that might not appeal to other groups. So overall, I would say that it was a pretty excellent product. I was quite happy, and it was a fun adventure to play. Like I said, there are some warnings and caveats, but that's pretty much true of anything. And I think it's actually one of the strongest adventures that Wizards has released for 5th edition. This one and Mines of Phandalar are definitely both probably their 2 best products so far, or adventure products anyways. We run a lot of homebrew stuff, but we've also done, Curse of Strahd was actually excellent as well, but I don't really count that one as strongly because it's basically just Ravenloft reskinned. As far as the other ones, we haven't done Ghost of Saltmarsh yet. We did do Storm King's Thunder, we did Tomb of Annihilation, we've done Curse of Strahd, we've done this one now. We're currently working on Dungeon of the Mad Mage. So we haven't done the Tiamat ones, and we only did Out of the Abyss for one night because we were missing some players, and rather than cancel, we just decided, well, let's just play something else. But then, we never went back to it again. So I can't really give a fair rating on that one either. And I haven't done Prince of the Apocalypse either. So out of the half or so that we have played, though, this was probably the best one, or the Lost Mines. So anyways, that's my conclusion. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. And, if you've played the adventure yourself, or run the adventure as a Dungeon Master, or even if you're just interested in it, don't be afraid to leave comments in the comment section. As always, I promise to read every comment. And thank you for watching. I'll see you next time in the dungeon.